Again, a special privilege for me to be here with you. Playing baseball is great fun. In the United States, in Korea, in Japan, parts of South America, in the Caribbean islands, they play baseball. It gets the attention of thousands of players and tens of thousands of spectators. In the United States each year, two of our best teams play off in what we call the World Series. During that week, the game gets most everyone's attention. I graduated from college and started teaching elementary school. Elementary kids play baseball. For the 12 years I was an elementary teacher and principal, I played baseball every noon hour for 12 years. And it was fun. And I enjoyed it for years after. You hit the ball. You run. You touch the bases in an all-out effort to score a run. It's important that you touch the bases and that you touch them well. But regardless of how far you hit the ball, regardless of how many bases you touch, regardless of how fast you can run, if you don't touch home plate, all your effort doesn't count for anything. Life's like that. We're born, our parents raise us, we go to school, we graduate, and we take off running, endeavoring to touch all the bases of life possible to us. In my work as an educator, I advised young people to get a good education and then go out and touch all the bases of life they possibly could. Succeed to the fullest extent in marriage, in home, in family, in church, in choosing and succeeding in a career or an occupation, making a living, saving for the future, travel, and the list could go on and on. The world is a fascinating place in which to live. There are so many good things to enjoy, to see, to do, to take advantage of. There is so much of life that is worthwhile. In the process of running and touching all the bases possible to us, it is possible to forget where home base is. And if we don't come home, it isn't going to count for anything. I think of all the great books there are, the literature to read, the fine music and art there is to appreciate. And these things add an appreciation and a dimension to the aesthetic side of life, which enhances the joy of living and allows us to share a portion of our soul with those we touch and those who touch us. Influencing lives in a positive way adds joy and appreciation to life and a rewarding base for me to touch, spending a lifetime educating young people. Living and working with those in another country and culture is a rewarding and fascinating base to touch. Through the understanding of other cultures, we gain a new and special appreciation for how God has blessed us in this world, and it teaches us that we are our brother's keeper. We do have an obligation to share the good news of Christ to share the good things that God has blessed us with to others around the world. We do have an obligation to share the good news of Christ's salvation. There is so much yet I would like to touch, to do, to feel, to discover, to enjoy. But through it all, if I forget to come home, it isn't going to count for anything. A couple of months, about 6 months ago, I had the opportunity of going home to where I grew up as a child, as a young man. My parents lived and worked on the campus of what was then called Canadian Union College, a school about 100 miles north of Calgary, Alberta, geographically. It was fun to go home, alumni weekend, meet all the people I went to school with 50 years ago, and a few teachers still left in the retired community. I remembered as a child my pony, how I loved to ride, and how during the winter months that pony hitched to a sleigh would pull us over the fields of snow. I remember ice skating on the rink, playing hockey, attending classes, sitting at the feet of teachers who influenced our lives, attending weeks of prayer, Friday night vespers, singing in the choir, playing in the band, and playing some baseball. But most important, falling in love with the girl I married. All good bases to touch, and all a part of coming home. The Bible is filled with stories, some unbelievable stories of people who needed to come home. I think of the prodigal son, who thought he needed to go out into the world and touch all the bases he could. In doing so, he wasted many years, a good share of his family's wealth, and for time he thought he was enjoying the game. And when it was almost over, and it seemed that all would be lost, he remembered where home was, and he made it back to his values, his faith, and his father's home. I think of Jacob, stole the birthright from his brother, and then fled in terror. While he busied himself touching the bases of life, working for his father-in-law for 14 years, somehow home became very important to him. And through a great deal of expense and effort, he moved his very large family and his cattle and all his belongings home to be reconciled to his brother and to his God. I think of Solomon, a man who certainly touched many bases in life. He began his rule as king of Israel in a very unique manner. He saw his need. He felt his inadequacy, and he sought God. And above all, that launched Solomon's reign as king in a very unique and remarkable manner, was a choice he made when God asked him what his heart desired. And the youthful king made a monumental request. He said, "Give your servant an understanding mind, that I might be able to govern thy people and be able to discern good from evil, right from wrong." And God granted this request and made Solomon the wisest man who had ever lived. And if you want to get just a glimpse of his knowledge and understanding, spend a half hour, an hour in the book of Proverbs. Never a man has said such intelligent things and given us so much wisdom to absorb. And God granted his request and gave him a great deal more besides. Solomon became proud of what he possessed. He had large stables filled with the finest horses. His chariots and coaches had whatever refinement the craftsmen of the day could build into them. Foreign dignitaries came and brought with them the finest gifts that they could afford. Solomon knew all the luxuries of life. The palace was filled with exquisite furniture. Rich draperies hung on the walls. Thick carpets covered the floors. Exotic perfumes. The food at his table was sumptuous. The chefs, the maid, the stewards were all in place to cater to his every need and desire. In seeking to strengthen his kingdom and build relationships with other nations, Solomon began to create political alliances. And these alliances were formed and sealed by the marriage to foreign princesses. In doing so, Solomon violated the principle God had given him, and in place of his wisdom and his strength came weakness, as these foreign wives brought into his palace and into his domain a mixture of heathen cultures and religion. The great sin of Solomon was in his effort to touch all those bases. He forgot where home base was. He forgot where his values were. He forgot where his faith had been established, and he broke his alliance with God. We don't realize the depth of his turning until we discover through the pages of history that some of these heathen wives influenced him to the extent that in his dominion altars were built for foreign gods, and some of them where human sacrifices were offered. It was a dizzy Solomon who found himself running around his world, touching all the bases of social, political, and military power. But in doing so, he plummeted to the depths of despair and lost his spiritual awareness and almost hit bottom. He nearly struck out. In deep depression, the Bible tells us, that Solomon declared, "All life is absurd. It's nothing." And by his own bitter experience, Solomon learned that a life that seeks only to touch all the bases of life is a waste. A life that only seeks earthly things is empty. A life that does not come home does not count for anything. And it seemed like all would be lost. It looked like the end of the game, except for one immutable reality. The same God that granted him wisdom in the beginning was not about to let him go. Solomon's God had encircled him with an atmosphere of grace that held him tight and would not set him free. And this grace would bring him back to his senses, to his beliefs, to his value, to his home with God. Solomon was reminded that the game is not over until you touch home base. The great king's days ended with him writing the lessons of life and the counsel he gives us in these Proverbs. We read instruction for us to follow, and admonition to take to heart and to live by. Solomon pleads, don't follow my wayward life, but please listen to my words. This game of life I am reflecting on here this morning seems oh so short when I look back over the nearly 77 years that I have lived. Time is of great importance. And yet, there's many more bases that I would like to touch. There's so many more things in this world that I would like to see, that I would like to enjoy. But those years ago, on that campus, 100 miles north of Calgary, Alberta, I learned the gospel shall be preached in all the world. And then the end will come to every nation. And if we look at the world today, we see this prediction being so fulfilled before our eyes each day. There's a hymn we often sing. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar. For our Father waits over the way to prepare us a dwelling place there. It's time we all went home. It's an enjoyable to run and touch the bases, but it's really the land that is fairer than day that we all want to see. How is it with you? Do you simply want to run around and touch some more bases? Our part in this final stretch, in this final inning, is to make one last run for home plate. The same grace that surrounded Solomon surrounds each of us today. He surrendered to God, and he became a winner. That same grace surrounds us. His testimony and those words from Solomon and his wisdom are so simple. He who trusts the Lord will prosper. Let us make a decision in favor of Christ today. A decision to favor eternity with Jesus. A decision to make that one last run and touch home plate. Because if we don't come home, it won't count for anything. Let us sing. There's a land that is fairer than day.